Okay. Okay, in that case, unless there are any questions, I'd like to call this to order and invite the Prime Minister to open the House in the case the signs their name.
As a Prime Minister of the government, we believe that the U.S. should replace Saudi Arabia with Iran as a major strategic partner in the Middle East. And we mean by replace the fact that it does not entirely break relations with Saudi Arabia, but in fact considers Iran to be as their major strategic partner. And by major strategic partner, we mean that they're going to enhance and they're going to reinforce their political and economical relations specifically in order to obtain the following, which is that we're going to try to prove that through the replacement of Saudi Arabia with Iran as a major strategic partner for the U.S., there's going to be much more benefits for the U.S. and for Iran, as well as the diplomatic relations are going to have a better chance of improvement. So, why should we replace Saudi Arabia with Iran? And lately, Iran has been putting itself in the market as a potential economical economic country in development, and from the fact that it has become the 17th most populous market in the world, including the basic needs and including other sort of goods that the U.S. might as well comply with this. So, in countries where growth is much more expected, are actually in the eyes and are actually in the objectives of the United States in order to practically improve their situation and improve other countries' situation, basically of economic necessity and out of economic need. What does this mean? That when they start having this major and strategic partner with the Middle East, they're going to have much more benefits in their economy. And in specific cases, hold just a second. In specific cases, that means that there's going to be a much more better assessment from the U.S. to Iran, who are actually looking for general assistance, know-how, and communication with the outside world, which we think that the U.S. is pretty good at having these know-how businesses implemented into other several countries, and this might as well prove a benefit for Iran and the United States. But you seem to disagree, ma'am.
Sir, Saudi Arabia still heads OPEC, which sets prices of oil within the global economy. Tell me why cutting off ties with Saudi Arabia is
Thank you.
harmful.
We said that that they're not going to entirely cut relationships, but they're going to include, or they were going to refer as a major strategic partner, Iran, basically as the main partner that they will have in the Middle East. Basically, as I said, because the government in Iran is looking for much more investment that comes from foreign countries to boost both its industry and to boost both its hard currency. We think that the United States has a better chance, and both Iran have a better chance when having these relationships or having these trade relationships, so that the currency of Iran can actually enhance itself and can actually enforce itself, because it's belonging to one of the most. It's going to become a trade partner, and it's going to become a major strategic partner with one of the most important economies that we have nowadays worldwide, basically because of the potential of the economical growth that it has, and because of the U.S. relationship and the specificity of this managerial assistance and the know-how that the United States can actually help to Iran in order to improve both the economical situation of Iran and both to enhance the economic relations that the United States has all around the world. And on the second argument, we call it political benefits, and we believe that economics is inseparable from politics, and politics are inseparable from economics. What this means, and what this would say, it would be a precedent for better diplomatic relations. Why? Because when you're becoming a partner, or when there's a transition from a country that used to be a contesting and conflicting country that you had relations with before, due to historical processes or due to historical events. Give me a second. Now becoming a country to be considered your associate, we think that in order to have business with these countries, there has to be mutual trust, and in order to enhance this mutual trust, we also think that the political relations between and the diplomatic relations between these two countries have to be set in order to acquire much more benefits for both parties. Give me just a second, ma'am. Yeah, I'll take your point.
Okay, the benefits that you speak about are not exclusive as long as you lift out sanctions. However, the harms from alienating Israel come uniquely from making Iran your strategic partner. Engage.
Thank you. But now what we're talking about is that how economics is inseparable from politics, and the fact that the United States wants to have or establish these economical relationships, they also have to engage with the political status, and they also have to engage with the political relations or the political conditions that Iran presets in order to have relations with or to have diplomatic relations with another countries. We believe that from this precedent that will set a place for better diplomatic relations in the future, considering that the U.S. is actually a country that has been a little bit, well, not a little bit, that the United States has been a country that has been deeply and heavily criticized for losing diplomatic relations with other countries that before they had economical relations with them and were effective. So what we have said so far is that because of this mutual trust and from the transition of this conflicting and contesting country that was before that you were before conflicting against into a country to be considered your associate, no thank you, ma'am. Because of the mutual trust that is needed in order to have this precedent happen, and because of the mutual trust that you need for economics to happen, because of the mutual trade that you're going to have, such as tariffs and trades, such as other economical sanctions, such as different set of diplomatic tools that are going to take place between the United States and Iran. We believe that this precedent is actually a much more is a benefit for both the United States and Iran, practically because the United States, no thank you, is going to have a much more legit, and is also going to improve their relationship, and is going to strategically be part, or is going to be strategically much more involved in not an invasive way in the Middle East through these trade partners that we're going to have. But the thing here, and what we're trying to prove, it is the importance of Iran, and the importance of Iran, besides of the geopolitical benefits that it proves, that it provides because of its location, and also for other different economic reasons, such as the oil pipeline that goes along the Middle East. We believe that it is much more important for the United States and Iran to establish these trades, basically because Iran is an economy that is growing, and it's a government that is actually looking for investment, and the United States, due to its own economical policies, as long as what it's looking actually for is to have much more investments in other countries in order to acquire much more revenue and to make the gross domestic product and the gross national product and their exports actually to increment and to improve. Whereas they can provide these tools and these necessities that Iran needs as a state, as a growing economy. And on the second part, on the political benefits, because we think that it's going to have a much better and much bigger impact on international diplomatic relationship when these two countries that used to contrast a lot now form part of a major strategic alliance in order to let the U.S. be part or be much more involved in the Middle East without being so invasive. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there's a very important word in this motion that we have to consider, and that is the word replace. So what we are talking about when we're talking about replacing a strategic partner is that Saudi Arabia will no longer have the primary place that it currently has in IR relations between the United States, which changes the geopolitics in the Middle Eastern region, as well as the way the United States not only deals with that region, but how it deals with partnerships as a whole. And that is, I think, extremely important in this case and what we're going to prove. So I'm going to rebut their arguments while I explain my case. So I have two basic arguments here. The first is the balance of power, and then the second will be liberalism. So we're going to use like IR theories in order to actually explain what's going to happen and why we don't think that Saudi Arabia should be replaced by Iran as the major strategic partner in the Middle East. So, firstly, going to the balance of power argument. So So if we consider the balance of power, and we think that, as is according to realism, that power is a limited and scarce resource that needs to be shared, and therefore that's why you have alliances between countries, then we have to consider that the United States has a strategic relation with Saudi Arabia for a reason to keep peace in the Middle East, as well as it has a relationship with Israel for strategic reasons as well. And that is extremely important. We have to remember that. And it has strategic relationships with these two countries in order to keep peace in the different regions. By replacing Saudi Arabia with Iran, the only thing that also occurs is that the balance of power is obstructed and is kind of is crashed against, because we have to remember that Russia is one of Iran's main allies and partners as well. So in this case, if we were to consider the balance of power and we're to consider major superpowers or important powers within the global scheme, then this is actually extremely dangerous, and we think that that's important. Also, we have to remember that that the U.S. has been sort of in a, I want to call it a virtual war with Iran. We have to remember the case of Stuxnet. Well, let me finish Stuxnet and then I'll take your point. Stuxnet, by actually going into and disabling nuclear reactors and doing all these kinds of things, because the United States was extremely scared that Iran would actually develop nuclear capability and use it against the West. Yes?
So we think that the main interest of the US is to actually stop Sunni organizations such ISIS, such Al-Qaeda, actually threaten on the US all over the globe. And we think that the Shiites is the only thing that can actually stop them.
Okay, so I understand your point. Everyone wants to stop ISIS, that is correct. But we don't think that stopping ISIS will be done by replacing Saudi Arabia with Iran, but actually upset the geopolitical balance in the region, actually make things worse for the United States. We think that's actually what's going to happen. Because let me talk to you about the nuclear deal. So right now, the nuclear deal that was signed was actually done in good faith in order to stabilize relations with Iran and the West, which has been a very important step. However, let's not remember the historical background. Let's not forget about the 70s. Let's not forget about that time when the United States tried to actually establish relationships with the Shah and ultimately failed because they tried to impose their ideology onto that region and ultimately ended up with the Ayatollah Khomeini in power, which ultimately ended up in an extremely unstable Iran. And that's actually what will happen if the United States tries to act in good faith and tries to name it its strategic partner with hidden interests, because we don't actually think that it's going to deal with Iran in a strategically partner way as this side actually tries to make it seem, but will actually make it ultimately worse, which will make conditions a lot more extreme and actually further the possibility of a situation such as what happened with the rise of the Shah, right? We have to remember that there was a revolution, we have to remember all the things all the bad things that happened then, and that would only continue to happen now. And that is something that is extremely dangerous, especially with a stable, I'll take you in a sec, with a stable sort of situation as a situation we have now. But you disagree.
How is it mutually exclusive of improving their economic relations, and because they have to improve their economic relations?
I'm not saying that we shouldn't improve economic relations, which is why I started this speech saying the word replace was extremely important. In the geopolitical scenario, when you replace the most important ally you have in a region with another, then you actually create tensions. And that brings me to liberalism, with my argument on liberalism. So the United States is partnered with Saudi Arabia for one main reason, and that is oil. And that is extremely important. So if Saudi Arabia feels that it is displaced from its current strategic role in power, then it will feel threatened. And it will not act in good faith with the United States. And that is something that we also have to remember, because that is part of the relationships that have been occurring in the Middle East for a really long time. So instead of solving anything, you have an unstable country as Iran, which you're not sure will actually turn on you, whose population will be uncertain that you're going to act in good faith, and ultimately be extremely upset, and then have an upset Saudi Arabia, who doesn't understand why it was displaced from its current role of power. And that is something that we think that will be very, very dangerous for this whole situation. We also think that oil being such a strategically important resource, and you need to continue to have the United States be the main ally in the Middle East in order to also deal with problems such as ISIS, instead of having someone like Iran being unstable and trying to deal with that crisis overall. So the only thing that happens is that the geopolitical tensions increase, and the only thing that happens is that you actually may upset the internal population who may not be sure of good intentions. So you would end up with the United States as a benevolent hegemon who tries to do good things, but in reality ends up upsetting everything that has been in the Middle East so far. Because it's not only about establishing economic relations, it's about the balance of power and making one country more important than the other. And we have to remember that under the international relations theories, that maximizing power is extremely important, and this would upset the balance. So, thank you.
The thing that's realized is kind of like the different premises in the case of the
Thus far, we have presented the fact that we actually believe that replacing Saudi Arabia with Iran is actually beneficial in terms of political and economical terms. But why do we believe this? Now, we do understand the fact that replacing actually means that you will prioritize now your relationships with Iran over Saudi Arabia. But why do we not see this as a harm? Let's consider the history of Iran, the recent history of Iran, and the relationships that it has had with the United States. Now, what we have seen is a tension due to the nuclear program that Iran had. But now what we are proposing here is actually giving them the enough importance in order for them to go back into the international stage as a respected actor and as a respected country, in order for them to regain the trust and also for United States to help them build the trust in a two-way kind of thing. Now, first of all, they spoke to us about the balance of power and how it is a scarce resource that has to be managed, and the strategic relationships for peace. And what we are seeing here on this side of the house is how we are presenting a geopolitical strategy. As we have already mentioned it in a point of information, what we are seeing in Iran is, for example, a closeness to the Islamic State. Now, if we now change our focus to trying to improve our relationships with Iran, we can actually better understand the context upon which the main problem is developing. Now, the fact is that Iran is a close neighbor to Iraq, for example, and if we can actually tackle through our new strategic partner the problems that we are seeing in the Middle East, we can actually make a better foundation in order for us to solve this. And that is a good geopolitical strategy, given that Saudi Arabia does not necessarily comply with the same ideology that the United States has, and that ultimately it will actually be more helpful. Now, they have also talked about how Russia is a major ally to Iran. But what we are saying is that Iran may continue to be an ally of Russia, but what we are also seeing is that Iran is in need of investment. Iran is in need of development due to the economic sanctions that have been put upon them. And if you can actually have a partner as powerful as the United States help you do that, then we believe that that should ultimately be their decision to do so. That the fact that the United States enters as an economic partner does not necessarily mean that tensions have to be created, because exactly of what she talked about liberating an economy, it actually implies diversifying your partnerships as well. And therefore, we believe that the United States does have a place in Iran. But you seem to disagree, ma'am. Yeah, what makes you think that the internal population of Iran will be in agreement?
I will address that point in the rebuttal of the case. But first, I will continue with
with the fact that you also mentioned that we would be imposing an ideology to Iran and that it would be terrible and it will only make it worse. First of all, you did not give any reason as to why this would happen, when in reality what we're seeing is a transition, a political transition as well as an economic transition. And this political and economic transition, as a result of the recent history, actually calls for partnerships, actually calls for help, a help that the United States is not only willing to give, but that it would also benefit them in the long run and in the short run. As we have already mentioned, Iran is a market waiting to be tampered, as well as setting a precedent for actually helping those who have already been somewhat stalled by the economic sanctions. Now, on the point that you mentioned of liberalism and on the point of information that you have made, how people may not trust them, what we believe is that this transition, no thank you ma'am, that this transition to actually becoming a strategic partner has to be gradual, that it won't necessarily happen from one day to another. And then in this process, we can actually build up trust. We can actually build up enough strategies in order for us to address the problems, because as we have seen, it is not impossible to negotiate between two countries that clash, because as it has been proved precisely, for example, from the nuclear discussions, we can reach an agreement between two different ideologies and between two different purposes and objectives. And therefore, from that, we can build up a strategy that is both helpful to Iran and to the United States. But you seem to disagree, ma'am.
Yes, currently, Iran funds Hezbollah and cover terrorist groups that pose direct threats to US autonomy. Tell me how being Iran's strategic partner changes that.
So what we are saying is that Iran has links to terrorist groups, but this can also be because of a political and economical void. Now, what we're seeing here is that if the United States actually does enter, they can give them enough reasons for them to not do it, to stop doing that kind of partnerships with terrorist groups. What we're seeing is that that an economical relationship with Iran can also be political. That it can actually improve their relationships in terms of diplomatic terms, actually building up from the recent history that we have seen. And because of these reasons, we believe that Saudi Arabia should be replaced with Iran for the United States as a strategic partner, simply because of the closeness that we have to the conflicts, to the most dangerous conflicts in the Middle East, as well as the economic benefits and political benefits that both countries can see. Now, why choosing over Saudi Arabia? Now, what we have seen in the past year is an ideological clash between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Now, we believe that this is harmful to their relationships in the terms. No, thank you, ma'am. We have seen a bit of a clash between these two countries in terms of ideology, and there's a dependency from the United States towards Saudi Arabia in terms of oil, for example. But if we're trying to develop more our industry, if we're trying to diversify, we can actually get these resources from Iran, and we can help them, and we can also stop the reliance that we have upon Saudi Arabia. And in this way, we can both strengthen the political objectives of the United States, as well as further develop the economical situation of Iran. Now, I want to emphasize the fact that we're not saying that we will eliminate Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner. What we are saying is that we will now prioritize our partners in terms of the benefits that we might gain. So what have we told you so far? The political benefits to the United States are clear in terms of how they would historically be able to help them rebuild a country that has been harmed by the economical sanctions for the past few years. And in doing so, they can actually mend some of their mistakes. They can actually build up diplomacy, and this would be a progressive kind of relationship. Therefore, proving to the population and to the government that benefits for the United States in terms that they can develop the market within Iran from their own industry, and that this can also help develop Iran. And in the third point, how choosing over Saudi Arabia is actually better for the United States in terms of diversifying. And for this we beg you, vote for government. Thank you.
Okay, I will entertain those people to invite the deputy of opposition to continue the case of the opposition.
All right, so thank you everyone for being here. The first issue that I want to address is this concept of the economic partnership. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is this idea that I say, like, look, they're going to rebuild, this is going to be like a great thing for the economy of Iran. So like, first thing, you don't actually require them to be your main strategic partner just so you can remove sanctions on them, right? That's not necessary. So we think we can get any benefits that they're talking about without having to replace our main strategic partner. The other thing that I want to talk about is the idea that the population hates the US, right? That you're actually going to have a big problem, because the last time that the United States has large influence in Iran was when the Shah was there. And it was actually the American influence that led to the sort of rise of the Ayatollah and that changed everything, right? We think that trying to replace Saudi Arabia with Iran as your main partnership, what you're going to end up having is going to be a fear from the population that the United States is returning to its old ways and that it's going to be trying to influence and westernize your culture, right? We think that there's going to be resistance there. We think that's going to create a problem because not only will Iran not want to create this new relationship with you, but if you attempt this replacement, what you're going to have instead is you're going to lose Saudi Arabia, you're going to lose Iran, you're going to create a mess, and you're going to create sort of like even more strained relationships for the future with Iran. We think that the best thing that you can do for the Iranian population and for yourself as the United States is to actually maintain your distance, treat them well, but don't intervene in anything. The other thing that I want to talk about this idea is they say like this graduality, right? We're going to do this gradually. It's not going to come out of nowhere, right? So what happens when you gradually start to cozy up to Iran? How will Saudi Arabia respond to that, right? We think that they will immediately pull back and you'll just be in a void where you actually have no strategic partner for years and years and years, and that's only if you succeed, right? So even if you succeed, you still end up in a situation where for years and years and years, you will have no strategic partner in the Middle East at all, and we think that that's really harmful, right? But the last thing that I want to talk about this, and the things that they bring up on their side is this idea of like, look, like ISIS, which was kind of like brought up in a POI, which is discussed like, look, ISIS is a Sunni extremist group, so are a lot of other groups that the United States is fighting, so it's really important that you should ally with Shias. Like, no, we actually think that's the opposite. You should actually be supporting any Sunni majority alternative that exists to things like ISIS, right? We think that a lot of culturally Sunni people in different areas in the Middle East see terrorist groups as their only option to have a voice and to be heard. We think that it's actually more important for you to fight that by giving them a peaceful option, right? Not by confronting them in a sort of like, oh, we're going to take the other side, right? That's exactly what benefits those terrorist groups. If they can prove that the United States is trying to fight against them as an ethnicity, right? We don't want you to enter that sort of battle. What is better is if you give an alternative that is one that is peaceful and then one that is supportive, right? We think that alternative is Saudi Arabia. Go ahead.
And we think that the alternative is to actually establish these diplomatic relations with Iran in order to make a precedent and in order to have much more better and non-invasive relations with the Middle East.
Okay, so let's talk about setting precedents in diplomatic relationships for a moment. So you have a long-standing relationship with both Saudi Arabia and with Israel, which would contradict you trying to set a new relationship with Iran. What do you think every single country is going to think of the United States' diplomatic credibility when they just willy-nilly decide to switch away from their long-term partners and regions, right? We think that that's something that's problematic because it takes away completely any credibility the United States might have in diplomacy, not just in this region, but in any region altogether. And that's really harmful, right? But the thing that I want to bring in is this concept of the Israeli partnership, because I think that's something that's really important for the United States. First, because of the internal aspects that happen in the Israeli-American partnership. The first being the political sway that Israel has in terms of the United States, right? We can see that the sort of Jewish community in the United States is really strong, and it is a large part of their identity that they are Zionistic, right? And we think that it's important that the United States reflect the ideals of its Jewish community, like from the inside, and that actually supports Israel in doing that, right? And since Israel has a long history of problems with Iran, we think that those are mutually exclusive. The other aspect is that we think that you're going to throw off balance in the Middle East in multiple aspects, right? Israel is a sort of way that you are allowed to exert your influence in the Middle East, and we think that it's really harmful if you're going to sort of create this tension with Iran, especially because you lose diplomatic credibility in that region. Then I want to go back and talk about some other aspects. So in the point of balance of power that we already brought up, we don't think that they properly engage with the idea that we talked to you about how there's already a division in the Middle East that has exerted a sort of balance, right? It's not ideal that you have to create this balance of powers for there to be peace, but if there is not this balance of power, then there is chaos, right? So what we can see is that you have powers like Russia supporting sort of Shia groups like Iran, and we have the United States supporting Sunni groups like Saudi Arabia. What happens when you start to have a breakdown of those groups is you start to get a mess that you did in like Syria, right? That's what happens when you don't have these powers equally exerting force. I'll take your point.
And we still believe that the United States has a free determination to replace their allies whenever the United States wants, in order to create much more better diplomatic relations with the countries that they consider that they should have better diplomatic relations.
Yeah, for sure. The United States can choose whoever it wants to be its main diplomatic allies. We're just saying that it's a really bad idea for you to choose Iran because there's no reason that Iran would want it. There's no reason the US should want it. So we don't even understand why, like, and you haven't really given us a reason why it's good, except that, like, it's going to kind of help their economy maybe. And we don't think that that's sufficient to upheave the entirety of the Middle East, right? That's just not enough. And we don't think that you've substantiated why that's the case. But I want to go back to this idea about sort of like Shia and Sunni. So what happened in Syria, right? One of the issues in Syria was that you actually had this sort of, one of the issues that you had that started this in the beginning, and it started to have an influence of both Saudi Arabia and Iran in trying to fidget around with Syria, was an economic dispute regarding pipelines, right? What actually happened here is that you had a, this is a true thing. This is, I know, you're nodding your head, but here's what actually happened. Syria was approached by both Iran and Saudi Arabia with, and Qatar actually, the Gulf states, with different programs in terms of what they were going to do economically. And what happened is that negotiations broke down because there was an imbalance in power in the area, right? Because Syria didn't want to negotiate one side, only wanted to negotiate with the other. And when you had the breakdown of balance power, then you start to have a bunch of issues which ultimately, we can argue, led to pernicious economic harms that allowed for the rise of organizations like ISIS to take hold, right? So we think that maintaining a balance of power is something that's really important. We think historically we've seen that. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the aspect of liberalism that my partner covered. And this is like the idea of like oil and OPEC, right? So first, let's recognize that as a part of OPEC, if you back on your deals from Saudi Arabia, this is going to create an issue for you and any other OPEC country, and they're not going to want to have dealings with you, right? That's problematic that you create OPEC as an enemy. We don't think that that's a good idea, so like, don't do that. And the other part is that you want to have an important oil partner in the Middle East so that you can exert influence in how those things are done there, right? We think that that's extremely important for the United States as it is a big oil consumer, and we don't see why you should turn your back on a long history of ally, lose political credibility, and ultimately not really gain anything in exchange because Iran doesn't really want to be your ally either. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank that speaker for that speech. My facial expressions, if they may in fact exist, they're purely there for his benefit. You shouldn't try and compliment. That's just essence of the big time. And I would like to invite the member of government to extend the case to the proposition here.
So in our side of the house, we believe that if we will show you that we will actually achieve the interest of the US in the Middle East that actually didn't rise up in this debate until now, we win this debate. I will have two main ideas in this debate. The first one, I will show you how we can actually achieve more stability in the Middle East in the political manner, and the second thing, how we can actually protect our allies in the military and strategic manner. Couple points of rebuttal before I will start up. Most of my rebuttal points will be integrated in my speech. So we've heard the idea that, we've heard the next idea. So Israeli people really dislike Iran, right? And if we will negotiate with Iran or like replace it with our, like as a strategic ally, the Israelis won't like it. So we have two answers for this. A, we really don't buy the claim. Maybe the right wing in Israel that's represented by Bibi Netanyahu will dislike it, but most of the Israeli people want that the Iranian ambition for nuclear weapon will end, and if we will show you how it's more possible in our side of the house, we win this idea. And second of all, even if the Israelis won't like it, but we will still achieve like a more stability to the region and Israel itself, it doesn't really matter because Israel has many other interests with the United States, such as like receiving money to buy, I don't know, the next Iron Dome and so on. So we don't think it is so relevant. Then we've heard the idea that no, you know what? Most it will be in my point. No, thank you. So we say, what are the American interests in the Middle East? So we say, A, we want a political stability, right? So we've heard the idea that it's a good thing from OO and from OG, and we do accept that it's a real good idea. But tonight we actually explain you what is the meaning to achieve those kind of things. So we say the first thing is to achieve this kind of stability, and the second thing is to protect our allies, right? Like Egypt, like Israel, and so on. So we say, please note that.
Sir?
No, thank you. So Iran is a place that wants to actually achieve more power. Why? A, because it hates Israel, right? From foreign intelligence, Israel has some nuclear weapon. Iran wants nuclear weapon to actually have to balance with Israel. And second, Iran hates the United States, right? And if the United States is the most powerful country in the globe, it wants something that actually have some weapon to balance it. We say that they call to Israel the little devil and to the United States the big devil, and then we think it's AIDS. So we think that no, thank you. So we think that the most important things to do is to actually give Iran incentives, right? Not to be afraid from the United States. Because I want to remind you that after the Shah fell, the United States did all the things to show to Iran that she is not welcomed anymore in the international sphere, right? The US didn't recognize in the Ayatollah regime, right? She didn't want to actually negotiate with the Ayatollah Khamenei, and therefore we say they made all the steps to actually get to create a gap between the United States and Iran. So we think that's a good thing to actually show Iran that we want to negotiate. And please note that in the current nuclear treaty, we saw that Iran actually willing to discuss with the United States. So we say we actually have really good facts that Iran wants to negotiate with the United States, and therefore we can actually achieve more things for our allies such as Israel. So please note that Iran is super powerful country in this area. Please note that the instability in Yemen, for example, when we see the Houthis that actually receiving money from Iran, right, to actually to break the current regime, which it's not good to the United States, because the United States has all the interest to actually have a negotiation, have a relationship with the Yemen government. Please note that Iran is the main sponsor for Hezbollah in south of Lebanon, right? It actually tells Hezbollah when to open a war with Israel and when not, right? We saw it in 2006. Please note that Iran is the current sponsor of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, right? They actually give it weapons, right? To actually to give them more weapons to actually fight against Israel. But we say if we will have some of negotiation, some influence, which we don't have in any case in the status quo, we will have more power to actually to tell Iran not to do some things. So if we will stop some things to become, such as another operation with Israel and Gaza, which will save thousands of lives of innocent people, we actually want this debate, and that's a crucial impact in this debate. Yes, second.
Okay, can you tell me how exactly becoming a strategic partner means that US can control the flow of money to terrorist groups?
Please note that we didn't say that we will have a full control on Iran. If we had some control by negotiation with Iran, right? They actually stopped their nuclear program, right? Which was their most important national program to negotiate with the United States. So if we will stop just some of the crucial and damaging things that Iran doing in the Middle East, it's a crucial benefit in this debate. Please note that we actually think that the war against ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, for example, and other organizations such as Boko Haram in Nigeria, which is natural enemies of Iran, which are Sunnis, extreme Sunnis, right? Extreme Salafis. So we have a good reason to actually play with Iran in the same round. Why? Because in the status quo, Iran doesn't want to actually negotiate with the United States to fight against organizations such ISIS and such as Al-Qaeda, right? We say that if we will give them the reason actually to cooperate with us and to fight against those places, which the United States don't have many, it's not that accessible to the United States to actually fight in Syria, right? Except bombing from the air, and she's not accessible to actually help the Houthis in Yemen, and she's not like accessible to actually to help the Shi'i regime in Iraq, which like sponsored many times by Iran and the United States. They have another interest actually to help and to actually achieve more stability to the Shi'i regime in Iraq. So for those reasons, to achieve more stability and more political stability in the area, to achieve more stability to our allies, we beg you to propose. Thank you very much.
Can I start? In a paradigm where Iran is an untested ally whose allegiances to the nuclear deal or to the US is currently unknown, and a Saudi Arabia that's currently going a crucial transition and expanding human rights, we think that alienating Saudi Arabia at this juncture has specific implications to the way Saudi Arabia will react. But secondly, we think that it has economic implications on US interests, something that we will extend to you and argue is the most important interest for the US in the region. But we'll also extend on how geopolitically we get better outcomes with a moderate, consistent ally as opposed to an untested, radical ally that is Iran. 3 points of extension in my speech. Firstly, what's the economic impact of alienating Saudi Arabia and brokering a deal with Iran? Secondly, what are the things that Iran does right now which are particularly problematic, and how replacing them as a strategic partner gives the US absolutely no influence over those things? And thirdly, what's the transition that Saudi Arabia is going through, and why is it important for us to support it through this transition? Firstly, we realize that this debate until thus far has not really understood the interest that US has in this region currently. We think primarily there are two interests. Firstly, there is an economic interest. And what is this interest? We think that since 2009, wherein Texas shale has necessarily grown exponentially, and you have thousands and thousands of dollars being invested within these ranches, oil has become more and more important to the US economy, and US economy is on the verge of energy independence in 2016 for the very first time in history. Why is this relevant to this debate? Because we say that at the point of time at which your economy is becoming more dependent on your own oil, the price at which you sell that oil really matters. What's the problem there? We think that the price of oil is currently set by a cabal and a cartel that is headed by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has immense influence in the OPEC, which currently sets oil prices and determines oil production globally, which ensures the price of oil gets lowered or pushed up in any circumstance whatsoever. Why is this problematic? At the point of time at which you replace Saudi Arabia with Iran, the kind of influence that US can have in terms of its economy being dependent on oil is far, far lesser. It's likely to alienate Saudi Arabia, which has already continued to maintain high levels of production despite crude prices going down immensely. We think in this scenario in particular, the oil economy and the shale economy, given the high capital that's required to invest in it, is likely to take a severe hit for Saudi Arabia to continue to do what it's doing and do it far worse because it's pissed off at US for what it's done. But secondly, we argue that there are geopolitical implications that CG until thus far has really not understood. Because we did hear good analysis from CG on how we need to ensure that we control Iran, and Iran is currently doing all of these bad things. However, what we fail to listen from both sides of government is how replacing Saudi Arabia with Iran necessarily gives you those benefits. And here I want to talk to you about 3 things that we look forward to when we are looking at a long-term strategic partner. And why is it something that we need to take into account for long-term? Because we say that geostrategic partnerships are more important in terms of your ability to broker peace or broker deals with different actors in the region, something that you can't change very easily, and something that more often than not pins your ideologies within the global scenario and at various international forums. Which means that the considerations that you should have, and this is the extension material that's more relevant than opening debate, is 3 things. Firstly, we think that you should have consistency and and reliability from the actor that you're partnering with. Secondly, we think that it should have less and less harm to other allies. And thirdly, it should have control in terms, like US should have control over the partner that you're trying to talk to. We think that Saudi Arabia meets these criteria better than Iran, and let's comparatively argue that. Why is that so? Because firstly, the idea that Iran is like a reliable actor is absolutely untested at this point in time. Yes, we have reached a nuclear deal. It hasn't been implemented. We don't know whether or not they will agree to, like we don't know whether or not they're likely to adhere to it. Why is that so? Because we've already seen the power center at the Ayatollah making statements such as they still hate the West, and the fact that they will continue to pursue a nuclear, like Iran anyway. We say that the power that Hassan Rouhani has, the moderate influence that's political within Iran, is far lesser compared to the religious theocracy that controls most of the governing decisions, which means that we think that that actor is unpredictable. Let's compare that to Saudi Arabia, something that we will do to you in this debate. Saudi Arabia is currently undergoing a crucial transition. For the first time, women have been able to stand in municipal elections and get elected. We think that these are like steps that are proving that we are going towards a more stable system of democracy and more stable system of devolution of power from the South. We need to understand that last year in January, we had the South that died, and then the power that devolved was more often than not to a larger number of people as opposed to centralized power that we already had. We see Saudi Arabia making progress in terms of consistency, in terms of chairing the Human Rights Council, in terms of making sure that they have more and more influence within their own, like in terms of making the lives of the people within that country much better, something that Iran simply does not have. So on the first criteria of consistency and reliability, Iran fails. But the second idea is in terms of it causes less harm to other allies. And here, opening argued to you that the Jewish lobby in the US is important, something that matters. But the second thing and the more important thing that we think is important in this debate is that we need to understand that Israel is currently the only actor with nuclear warheads in the scenario. They might argue that a lot of people within Israel might be happy with Iran being the strategic partner. However, the people in power, Bibi Netanyahu and the far right, are the people that are taking control of the decisions that need to be made in terms of bombing or in terms of attacking Hamas, which means that the power structure is likely to be far more alienated. And for the near future, given that like elections in Israel only happened in March last year, we are likely to have the far right staying in power, which means that alienating this far right is far worse off in this particular scenario, which means that we are less likely to want to be able to deal with Iran more. We think that the historical relationship that US and Israel has is already at splinters, and we think that the nuclear deal has already seen a lot of response from Israel that's negative. We don't want to break that off entirely by replacing Iran, something that we argue is a unique benefit. But the last thing that I want to argue in this debate is why we think that there's a need for a moderating voice within this Middle East. Because we think Iran more often than not is a more radical voice. It's a voice that's considered as an actor that can bomb, an actor that takes military action, an actor that pursues nuclear options. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is looked at as a more moderating influence. Sure, they started bombing the Houthi rebels, but it took time for them to get to that stage before which they were entirely pursuing diplomatic options within the region. We think that Iran is more likely and more trigger happy to be able to act in these instances, and we think that's particularly problematic because it exacerbates the tensions within this region, which is already conflict driven. To argue that we will have more power and more influence with Iran in this region is fallacious, because now we already see Iran growing in power. It already feels like it's already got power with the US by being able to negotiate the nuclear deal in terms that are favorable to it. If we pander to it furthermore, we are pandering to a power center that's less likely to listen and has no democratic checks and balances. We think that's particularly harmful. Saudi Arabia is transitioning. We stand by that. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank my speaker for that speech. Let's let the government whip to make the case for the proposition.
Okay, two clashes in this debate. First is an economical clash as whether we are going to gain economically from making Saudi Arabia, making Iran our main strategical partner. Second clash is political clash, geopolitical clash regarding all the geopolitical outcomes in matters of security and stuff like that. Now, it is very important to understand that economical clash is very connected to the economical outcomes are connected directly to matters of security and stability. So if we prove you that in the long term we will get much more stability from developing this kind of relationship with Iran, we will also have all the economical benefits from this thing because of more stability, because of a normal transaction of oil and stuff like that. But before I'm going to go into the clashes, 3 points of rebuttal. First of all, we heard all this idea, we heard the idea about the oil, why it's problematic to cut the relationship with Saudi Arabia because it's so important and has control over the oil prices, an idea we already heard also from OO. But it is important to understand, first of all, Iran also has oil. They have many, huge amounts of oil. Second of all, we see today as the prices of oil drops because we are finding more and more oil outside the Middle East, so the world is starting to be less dependent on the Middle East regarding question of oil. And okay, now second thing, we heard that the idea about control, that if we making Iran strategic partner, it's not necessarily true that we will have the ability to control them, but please know that first of all, even today with Saudi Arabia, we don't have a full control on all their political decisions, because we do support Saudi Arabia, but we don't see them go and fight against ISIS and doing all those stuff. So today the main relationship with Saudi Arabia are economical and not strategic because of the ideological differences between the two. Thirdly, we heard the idea that Saudi is going through a very important process of democratization. First of all, we don't heard any analysis explain to us why there's higher chance that this process is going to stop. Second of all, there are many different other interests in Saudi Arabia why this process is going to continue. Okay, because Saudi Arabia already today, regardless the strategic question, they have a huge interest in continuing economical relationship in the United States because of economical reasons, because of reasons of the influence of the United States in the world, of their ability to make sanctions and stuff like that. So they're not going just to break off all the relationship with the United States because it will be just a suicide from their point of view. No, thank you. And fourthly, we heard all this idea regarding Israel. First of all, as Rami explained to you, note that the reason why we have this huge hatred between Israel and Iran and all those things we hear from Bibi about their nuclear program and stuff like that is because of the problematic relationship between Iran and United States. Because please know that historically, Iran and Israel didn't have any conflicts between them in the past. The core issue is the relationship between the United States and Israel, and this is why, as Rami explained to you, this is exactly why they want to try to get a nuclear develop a nuclear program. So if we will normalize the relationship between Iran and United States, break this kind of ideology and situation in which there are such a big enemies, Iran will no longer have these huge incentives it has today to promote its nuclear program, because it will have the support from the United States to support such groups as Hamas, because again of the influence of the United States. Please note that Hamas doesn't share the same ideological, religious background with Iran, and still Iran supports them simply because of the relationship with United States. So if we will make those relationships better, they will simply stop supporting actors like Hamas, because they will have no reason to do it. No, thank you. Now onto the clashes. So. Okay, so first of all, it's very important to understand why on the practical level those relationship with Iran is possible. Because we heard all this history about the Shah and stuff like that, but first of all, please know that today the situation is so different, and the hatred towards the United States is made by propaganda. If the leaders today will decide to stop the propaganda in Iran, no thank you, there is a much lesser chance that this hatred will continue and that this relationship will not work. But then regarding the political clash, we heard few different explanations from both teams why this will be problematic, and we heard from Rami all the answer and analysis why strategically we will gain this much more, because today we don't have any ideological common ground with Saudi Arabia. This is an idea we heard already from OG. But what Rami gave you, and this is most important, is the deep analysis of the basic strategic ground we have today, the United States has today with Iran regarding all the different terrorist groups like ISIS, like Al Qaeda, the ability of Iran and their motivation to try to fight all these organizations. So eventually, when we're going to support that and going to fight with Iran against those organizations, we'll have much higher chance to beat those terrorist groups when we have Iran on our side and not Saudi Arabia that doesn't do it today. So because of all those things, because we want to create much more stability, because we want to destroy ISIS, we beg you to support.
Mr. Speaker, U.S. interests within the Middle East are one, in order to ensure long-term peace and stability within the region. Two, political in terms of the kind of allies that it makes for the long term, and three, the economic incentives that the U.S. has for its intervention within the Middle East. I'm going to tell you why on all 3 points Saudi Arabia is a better ally for the US as compared to Iran, and why Iran as an ally would actually mean a lot more harms than in the long term, right? Like firstly, what government has completely failed to deal with is our idea that Saudi Arabia is actually a better ally. The fact that it is actually transitioning right now, the fact that it has always been a better long-term partner. We do agree that possibly normalizing relations with Iran is good, but what we do tell you is that is especially bad when it leads to Saudi Arabia getting alienated in terms of its role in the Middle East. What we have told you is that deals with Saudi Arabia would lead to greater long-term peace, because Saudi Arabia has been a long-term partner. There is support within the country for the West, for Western ideals. We tell you that as we've already established, Saudi Arabia is transitioning, which is clearly been shown by the municipal elections where women are being allowed to elect, by the fact that you have greater number of women drivers. The problem with Iran and complete unilateral support for Iran within the Middle East, is that at no point are you clear if Iran would ever become moderate and stop wanting nuclear weapons within this region? We tell you that this is unlikely to happen, and that Iran as a country is more likely to continue would continue its pursuit for nuclear weapons because it has a theocratic power center, because most of the power within this region goes through the clergy, and that this religious clergy is what is responsible for a lot of these decisions. Upon the idea of long-term peace, we tell you that Saudi Arabia is far more stable because there's not been any regime changes or revolutions as compared to Iran, where there have been multiple revolutions and multiple regime changes. We tell you that support for Iran in itself is an unpredictable ally to have, because you're never sure whether the support that you're getting from Iran would actually be applicable. Beyond this, we tell you that right now all the power that is concentrated in Iran is within the religious clergy, is with the Ayatollah, and so even if there are democratic changes that do occur, the Ayatollah always has the final say, which is why it is highly unpredictable. Onto the political ideas, what we've told you is two things. One, that this alienates Israel, and that Israel is a very valued geopolitical partner. And two, the idea that as a country you cannot justify your support for another country that funds terrorist groups and that funds violence against your allies. Right. Onto our first idea, that this actually alienates Israel. What we've told you is that. What they would like you to believe is that Israel has many interests, and that Israel will agree in the long term because Israel has traditionally been a partner of the US. What we tell you is that Netanyahu getting elected as the prime minister again was based upon his populist measure of being against the Iran deal, of actually propagating the idea that Iran is an enemy. Iran is someone that we should not support at any measure because of their active pursuit of nuclear weapons, which threatens Israel's very existence. Considering that Israel and the Israeli lobby has always been against Iran, we tell you that Israel is unlikely to agree to this, especially considering how it actively went out and condemned the nuclear deal, even though it was agreed with by the P5+1, like the most prominent countries in the world. We tell you that Israel is more likely to go ahead and be against more support towards Iran. The second idea that Iran within status quo continues to fund like the Assad regime, like other terrorist groups within the Middle East. What government would like you to believe that the exercise of the soft power, like through economics, would actually change decisions within Iran. We tell you that is unlikely to happen because of the severe anti-West rhetoric that exists within Iran. Like, there has always been skepticism of the nuclear deal, where they have you believe that this is the West's way of imposing its ideology and imposing its measure upon Iran. We tell you that once there is this imposition of ideology and this imposition of power in dictating what Iran can or cannot fund or who it can ally with, there will be a visceral reaction from the people, from the religious clergy that we're talking about, which will lead to greater radicalization and this greater pursuit of the nuclear power that we're talking about, because that is the only way that they see their geopolitical interests being looked after. Onto the idea of tackling ISIS, what we've told. Before that, yeah.
Okay. Regarding Israel, already today you have a public discourse in Israel regarding a strategic coordination with Iran, and you already have a strategic coordination with Russia, which never happened for 50 years because of ISIS, which is a common enemy for all sides.
We tell you that combating ISIS and taking this as a measure is a blatant lie because of the kind of status quo that you're witnessing, because of the kind of clear mandate that has been given to Benjamin Netanyahu, where they've told him that Iran is the enemy, that you cannot allow normalization of the West with in fact, upon the idea of tackling ISIS, what we tell you is that there is no clear measure upon how what the best possible idea is to actually deal with ISIS. Like what opposition tells you is that more active relations with Iran would mean that you have a greater presence on the ground to deal with ISIS. I mean, the reason US itself hasn't put boots on the ground is because there is no clear measure of whether putting boots on the ground is actually a good thing. We tell you that historically this is actually a very poor measure, because putting boots on the ground and invading Iraq is what led to the formation of ISIS to begin with. Considering this scenario, we tell you that actually allying with Iran for the idea of putting boots on the ground and having a greater presence is not something we stand for the reason that this makes more sense politically and economically. We're very proud to oppose.